for the first time, WrestleMania will feature a women's main event. WWE superstar Ronda Rousey, Rowdy.
She was untouchable, unbeatable, the most dominant female athlete on the planet, until she wasn't. 1 minute, Ronda Rousey was snapping arms, breaking records, and ruling the octagon. The next, she was gone. No farewell speech, no explanation, just silence. Fans blamed brutal knockouts, but what if that's only part of the story? Years later, she's finally talking. And what she's revealing about the UFC, the money, the politics, and the hidden injuries. It's messy, shocking, and way deeper than anyone expected. The Golden Girl who broke everything. Let's start from the top, because you simply cannot understand the fall without first understanding just how high Ronda Rousey had climbed. By 2015, Rousey wasn't just a UFC champion, she was the UFC. The promotion had been trying to crack the mainstream for over 2 decades, and this one woman from Venice Beach did it almost single-handedly. She was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She appeared in Fast and Furious 7. She trained with the legendary Floyd Mayweather. President Obama name-dropped her. Barack Obama was a Ronda Rousey fan. Now, let that sink in. Inside the octagon, she was nothing short of terrifying. She held the UFC Women's Bantamweight Championship for 1,074 days. She defended it 6 times. Her average fight lasted less than a minute. Miesha Tate, armbar. Alexis Davis, ground and pound in 16 seconds. Beth Correa, 34 seconds with a barrage of punches that ended in a knockout. She wasn't just winning fights, she was erasing people. The media called her the most dominant athlete in any sport. Dana White, the UFC's infamously tough-to-impress president, called her the best fighter he'd ever worked with. She was the Golden Girl, the cash cow, the face that launched 1,000 pay-per-views. So when it all came crashing down, people weren't just shocked. They were devastated and confused, and maybe, just maybe, a little suspicious. Because here's the thing about someone falling from that kind of height. The fall rarely has just one cause. And the story Ronda eventually told the world, it had layers nobody saw coming. But before we get to the bombshells she dropped, we need to talk about the night everything changed. The night that wasn't just a loss, it was a destruction. So, what exactly happened inside the octagon that shattered the myth of the Rowdy one? The 2 nights that broke her. November 14, 2015, Melbourne, Australia, UFC 193. Ronda Rousey walked into Etihad Stadium as the most famous female athlete on the planet. Not just a champion, a phenomenon. Movies, magazine covers, sold-out arenas. She wasn't just winning fights, she was owning the entire sport. And then, in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Across from her stood Holly Holm, a decorated boxer, but not exactly a household name. Most casual fans expected another quick Rousey finish, another armbar, another highlight reel. Instead, they witnessed one of the most shocking upsets in MMA history. Second round, a perfectly timed head kick. It was clean, violent, and final. Rousey hit the canvas unconscious before she even understood what happened. The arena went silent, not shocked, but stunned, like the world had just glitched. And then came the aftermath, the jokes, the memes, the think pieces. Late-night hosts tore into her. Social media turned overnight. Fans who once worshipped her suddenly became critics. The same dominance that made her a star now made her a target. And Rousey, she vanished. No interviews, no statements, no social media posts, just silence. For over a year. Then came December 2016, UFC 207, the comeback everyone was waiting for. Her opponent? Amanda Nunes, the reigning champion, known as the Lioness. She was dangerous, precise, and ruthless. Still, fans hoped for redemption, a comeback story, a return to dominance for Rousey. But what they got was worse. Just 48 seconds. That's all it took for Nunes to dismantle her. Punch after punch, Rousey was barely able to defend herself. She didn't land anything meaningful. Not one shot. Referee Herb Dean had to step in and stop it. It wasn't just a loss, it was a collapse. And once again, Rousey said nothing. No post-fight interview, no press conference, no explanation.
Maybe one day I'll be satisfied, but that day hasn't come yet.
She walked out and disappeared. That's when the questions started. Was she embarrassed, mentally broken, done with fighting? Or was something else happening behind the scenes, something physical, something far more serious? Because years later, in 2024, Rousey dropped a revelation about her brain that changed everything. And suddenly, those 2 nights didn't just look like defeats, they looked like warning signs. But to understand why that revelation hit so hard, you have to go back to the beginning. Because Ronda Rousey's story didn't start in the octagon. And trust me, her origin story is just as intense. Born to fight, the making of Ronda Rousey. Ronda Jean Rousey was born on February 1, 1987 in Riverside, California. And from the very beginning, nothing about her life was ordinary. Her father, Ron Rousey, was a man she adored. He was also a man she lost at just 8 years old. Ron suffered a back injury in a sledding accident, and upon discovering he had a blood disease that had gone undetected, he tragically passed away shortly after. Ronda found him. She was 8 years old.
For that, when he passed, I would just try to just tell myself that he was on a business trip and he'd be back.
That kind of grief doesn't just shape a child, it rewires them. Her mother, Anne Maria DeMars, was no ordinary woman either. She was the first American to win a World Judo Championship, a distinction she earned in 1984. So when Ronda started training judo at 11, it was almost destiny. By 15, she was training full-time. By 17, she was the youngest judoka ever to qualify for the Olympic Games. She competed at the 2004 Athens Olympics as a teenager. She came back to win bronze at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, becoming the first American to medal in Olympic judo in nearly a decade. In a sport defined by discipline, sacrifice, and pain tolerance, Ronda Rousey was already exceptional before she'd ever stepped inside an MMA cage. But here's where it gets complicated. Those judo years, the brutal training, the hard sparring, the constant physical punishment came with a cost nobody was talking about. And years later, that cost would become the most significant health revelation of her career. She transitioned to MMA in 2011, signed with Strikeforce, won that championship, and landed in the UFC when the promotion absorbed Strikeforce in 2013. The rest, as they say, was history. But the history she was writing had a shadow, one she was carrying alone. So what was she hiding? What was the secret she kept from the UFC, from the fans, and maybe even from herself? And why did coming clean about it take almost a decade? The brain bombshell. She kept secret for years. In 2024, while promoting her memoir, Our Fight, through a series of Instagram live sessions, Ronda Rousey said something that stopped everyone cold. She revealed that she had been suffering from concussion symptoms throughout her judo career, and that she had concealed them in order to keep competing. Now, read that again. She hid a history of brain trauma so she could keep fighting. She described experiences during fights where she would lose chunks of her vision, where she'd get hit and whole sections of her visual field would just go black. She kept fighting anyway. She kept winning anyway. And she kept quiet, because if she didn't, she knew what it would mean for her career. Now, in 2026, ahead of her comeback fight against Gina Carano, a new medical development emerged. A specialist gave her a diagnosis that changed everything. What she had been experiencing wasn't necessarily a concussion every single time. It was something called migraine aura, or more specifically, cortical spreading depression, where neurons get overly excited, depolarize, and shut down in a wave, temporarily cutting off sections of vision. The doctor connected the dots. Epilepsy runs in Rousey's family, and there's a documented link between epilepsy,
Ambition in a woman is something that should be celebrated.
and migraines. People who suffer from migraines are also more susceptible to concussions. The more concussions Rousey sustained, the more easily the migraine response was triggered. It was a vicious cycle she'd been unknowingly caught in for years. This revelation raises enormous questions about what the UFC knew, or should have known, about the neurological toll being taken on one of their biggest stars. Rousey has said herself that she concealed these issues to compete. But in a sport where fighter safety is supposedly a priority, was anyone asking the right questions? Was anyone looking out for her? Because when you consider those two knockout losses through this lens, they read very differently. They weren't just upsets. They may have been the inevitable result of a woman whose brain had been absorbing damage for years. Damage that nobody in power seemed particularly motivated to investigate. And that brings us to the real scandal. Because the concussions were a secret Ronda kept. But the money, the politics, the power games behind closed doors at the UFC, that was a scandal the organization was keeping from all of us. The UFC's dirty little secret: power, money, and control. Let's talk about what's been swirling in MMA circles for years, and what Ronda Rousey has now confirmed with her own words. The UFC has always had a reputation for being, let's say, aggressive with its business practices. There have been long-standing whispers from fighters, managers, and insiders about the organization's tendency to play favorites, manipulate matchups, and use financial leverage to keep athletes in line. For a very long time, those whispers were just that, whispers. Then came the antitrust lawsuit. Le versus Zuffa was a landmark class action case in which fighters sued the UFC for allegedly using monopolistic practices to suppress their pay. The case dragged on for years and eventually settled in February 2025 for a staggering $375 million to be divided among fighters who competed between 2010 and 2017. Legal experts estimated that Ronda Rousey personally took home around $6 million from that settlement. And the unsealed documents? They revealed that she had made significantly more money during her championship reign than the public purses she'd disclosed, which raises its own eyebrow-arching questions about just how much money was flowing behind the scenes. Beyond the lawsuit, there have been consistent allegations that the UFC ran an informal system of compliance where fighters who played ball with sponsorship deals, promotional obligations, and management-friendly matchups were rewarded with better pay-per-view points, more favorable fight bookings, and positive media treatment. Those who didn't, well, they found themselves sidelined, smeared, or quietly buried under unfavorable cards. Rousey herself has spoken about confrontations with UFC executives over ethical concerns, including issues around fighter safety and injury concealment. She's always been someone who said exactly what she thought, which made her both beloved by fans and, apparently, difficult to manage. And then, just recently, in February 2026, she pulled back the curtain even further. Speaking on the Jim Rome show, she explained in detail how her attempted UFC comeback—
"We're going to find a way to let you know that's a bad idea. I'm the only one that's going to be able to fight officially."
had fallen apart. Dana White, to his credit, apparently came through with a genuinely extraordinary offer, a deal that would have seen her earn more per pay-per-view buy than literally anyone in UFC history. If she hit her historic numbers, she would have made as much from one fight as she had in her entire career. But then, the timing slipped. Gina Carano needed more prep time after giving birth. And while the fight date got pushed, something massive changed in the UFC landscape. The promotion signed a 7-year, $7.7 billion deal with Paramount+, eliminating pay-per-view entirely. The deal Rousey had been promised was built on PPV money that no longer existed. When she went back to negotiate a guaranteed flat fee that would replace those PPV earnings, the UFC, more specifically TKO, its publicly traded parent company, said no. And Rousey didn't mince words about why. Their best interests now lie in minimizing costs, not maximizing fights. As a publicly traded entity legally obligated to protect shareholder value, lavishing a returning star with an unprecedented guaranteed payday was simply not on the agenda. She made clear this wasn't Dana White being difficult. This was corporate machinery, grinding against the interests of the people who built the sport. She went on to accuse the UFC of being more interested in cost-effective events than the best fights possible. But rather than sit in a corner and take the loss quietly, what did Ronda Rousey do? Because if you think getting lowballed by a billion-dollar corporation was going to silence her, you clearly haven't been paying attention. The Great Escape, WWE, Reinvention, and what she built without them. After UFC 207, most people assumed Ronda Rousey was done and finished, a cautionary tale about hubris and fragility. But they were spectacularly wrong. In 2018, she walked through the curtain at WrestleMania, the Super Bowl of professional wrestling, and the place erupted. Rousey had signed with WWE, and what followed was one of the most remarkable career reinventions in sports entertainment history. She was raw, she was real, and she was absolutely magnetic. She became the Raw Women's Champion. She headlined WrestleMania 35 in a historic all-women's main event alongside Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch, the first time women had ever closed out WrestleMania. She wasn't just good for a first-timer. She was genuinely excellent. The athleticism, the intensity, the charisma, it all translated. She spent years in WWE, took time off to have children, came back, and eventually parted ways with the promotion in 2023. The nature of her WWE exit was its own complicated story, reports of tension over creative direction, and her relationship with the WWE fanbase, which had grown more complicated as her run wore on. But that's a whole other video. What matters here is what the WWE chapter proved. Ronda Rousey didn't need the UFC. She could build something entirely new. And while she was busy reinventing herself, the sport she'd built was quietly grappling with everything she'd left behind. So after everything, the injuries, the politics, the money fights, the reinvention, when the dust settled, was there any going back? And what exactly does it say about the UFC that their greatest women's star ended up fighting her comeback on Netflix for Jake Paul's promotion instead? The comeback, the receipts, and the reckoning. This is where we are right now, and it is juicy. On February 17, 2026, it was officially announced: Ronda Rousey versus Gina Carano, May 16th, Intuit Dome in Inglewood, California. Most valuable promotions: Netflix, Jake Paul's show, not the UFC's. The announcement sent shockwaves through the MMA world. Carano, a former UFC fighter who hasn't competed since 2009, is making her own comeback after 17 years away. Both women are in their late 30s, both with something to prove, and neither of them are under the UFC umbrella. The optics, devastating for the UFC. This was the exact kind of blockbuster event the promotion lives for. Two icons, a decade-long dream fight, a cultural moment, and they let it walk right out the door because they wouldn't pay. Rousey is training in Albuquerque at Jackson Wink MMA, posting footage online, looking focused and motivated in a way that honestly hasn't been seen from her in years. The medical green light she received, understanding her neurological symptoms as migraine aura rather than repeated concussions, has clearly lifted something from her shoulders. This isn't the haunted woman who left after UFC 207. This is someone who has answers, who has healed, and who has unfinished business. And she's making the UFC feel every bit of it. By taking this fight to Netflix and MVP, she's not just making money, she's sending a message. She explicitly framed the event as an MVP versus UFC competition. She accused the promotion of treating class action antitrust lawsuits as routine business expenses. She called out the corporate machine for prioritizing shareholder value over the sport's greatest fights. For a woman who spent years being quietly compliant, "Don't punish me for being easy to work with." She literally said that. This version of Ronda Rousey is a completely different proposition. She's got receipts, she's got reach, and she's got a Netflix fight in May that's going to make a lot of very powerful people very uncomfortable. The scandal that ended her UFC career wasn't just 2 knockouts. It was a system that celebrated her when she was useful and discarded her when she got expensive. It was a sport that let her fight with brain trauma it should have caught. It was a corporate machine that took her best years, her biggest draws, her body, and then told her she was setting too much of a precedent to pay her what she was worth. And now, for the first time in nearly a decade, Ronda Rousey is back in a cage. Not theirs, hers. So there you have it, the real story behind the rise, the fall, and the absolutely scorching comeback of Ronda Rousey. From brain trauma she hid for years to a UFC that squeezed her dry and then refused to pay her what she's worth, to strutting onto a Netflix stage and flipping the whole thing upside down. And honestly, we are here for it. If you made it this far, smash that subscribe button right now, because you never can tell. We could be diving deep into another icon whose behind-the-scenes story is going to blow your mind. You will not want to miss it.